Hi, I'm James Taverner in the Gas-Powered Energy Futures Group in IHS Markit. And in today's video, we're talking about Japan's announcement of a 2050 net zero emissions target. Now, this could transform the energy outlook for the world's largest importer of LNG, the third largest importer of coal, and the world's fifth largest electricity market. To help us discuss what this means, I'm very pleased today to be joined by Kaori Tachibana, Associate Director for IHS Markit based in Tokyo. So Kaori, first, can you please explain what the announcement was and was it a surprise?
Sure, James. Thank you. So in October, Prime Minister Suga announced in Parliament that Japan will set a new target to cut its greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. This target is an acceleration of the existing plan, which aimed at reducing emissions by 80% by 2050 and establish a decarbonized society as early as possible thereafter. So this new proposal brings forward that net zero aim to a specific year and follows similar commitments made by China and South Korea. And prior to this, in July, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry also announced a plan to phase out inefficient coal plants by 2030. And this series of announcements has laid out a clear ambition for Japan to address its coal fleet and to strive towards a net zero society. And yes, this was a surprise as there has not been a clear strategy to date to address Japan's coal fleet and its emissions. However, companies such as JERA, who is the largest buyer of LNG and coal, have already announced a plan for virtually zero carbon dioxide emissions in its operations. And many large power consumers, such as Sony Corporation, has also signed on to RE100 pledges and are calling on the government to increase renewables.
That's interesting. Seems to be a trend that we're seeing in many markets around the world with private industry almost leading the way in some ways in driving these changes as well as governments. So, okay, what does Japan need to do to meet this target? I mean, where do you see the biggest challenges?
Yes. So getting to net zero by 2050 will need a major restructuring of Japan's energy mix. Japan has emitted 1,200 million tons of CO2 equivalent in 2019, making it the world's fifth largest market by emissions. And within the energy sector, power generation is the biggest source of GHG emissions, accounting for 36% of the total, and that will be one of the main focus areas.
So Japan's power sector, of course, has already experienced a lot of challenges over the past decade with the impact of the 2011 earthquake on nuclear, for example. So what are the current plans for power and are they changing?
Yes, you're right. Nuclear has been a very important power source in Japan. Nuclear in purple here comprises a large portion of the power mix until 2010. However, many reactors have struggled to restart after the 2011 earthquake. The current government targets for nuclear energy is to account for 20 to 22% of the power generation by 2030. But as you can see, nuclear plants have struggled to restart due to strong public oppositions and legal challenges from local residential groups. So to meet this target, most of Japan's remaining nuclear reactors will have to come back online, with lifetime extended beyond the current 40-year limit. We have only 9 of the reactors currently able to restart, with a generation mix of 7% this year. So this target seems very challenging at the moment. And within our forecast, we expect nuclear to account for only 14% of the power mix by 2030, with renewables expected to fill that gap. The thermal generation targets you see here will also need to be reduced significantly to move towards the net zero. Details of the coal phase-out plan have not been published yet, but the initial announcement indicates the government is considering shutting down the subcritical and supercritical coal plants, and that is around 114 of the country's 140 existing units. Discussions of the coal phase-out plan are currently ongoing, and after a detailed evaluation, assessing factors such as the impact on cost and on security of supply, There is a chance that the government may close fewer plants, but in any case, a significant coal shutdown will lead to a much smaller 2030 market share than the 26% currently targeted.
Yeah, and if anyone's interested in finding out more about the coal phase outs that we talked about there was a webinar you did recently which discussed that in Japan, Korea, and Australia. And I recommend people listening check that out as well. So obviously it's quite early days. We've only just found out about this announcement, but what's our thinking at the moment? How could Japan try and meet these targets?
Well, we do long-term forecasting in different scenarios, including low-emission cases for 1.5 to 2 degrees outlooks. These were done before the Japan net zero announcements, but it helps us to explore what a net zero society would entail. In the low emission case shown in the 2 green lines on this chart, Japan's emission falls by 85 to 87% in 2050 compared to 1919 levels. One of the pathways we're showing here, the multi-tech mitigation in light green, focuses on electrification, and here renewables provide over 80% of power in 2050, with just a small role of fossil fuels. The other pathway is the accelerated carbon capture storage in green, and this explores extensive use of CCS. And even in this high CCS case, the share of fossil fuels in power generation drops to 10% by 2050, much lower than the levels of over 70% we see today.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear. It looks like a complete transformation, in particular, a big drop in fossil fuel consumption, which would be a huge change. What do you think these large drops in fossil fuel consumption would mean for international energy companies?
Well, we don't yet know how Japan plans to meet the net zero target. Further details will come in the 6th Strategic Energy Plan, due to be announced next year. But further policies and tools will need to be announced to meet this target, potentially including more carbon pricing or coal closures. And these add uncertainty and risk to businesses and long-term planning in what has traditionally been a stable policy environment. Particularly for LNG, long-term demand will decline. But how much and how quickly depends on the strategic choices for renewables, nuclear, and low-emission gas. Japan's importers will need to assess their future demand prospects in this net zero emission world. Carbon neutral LNG could also provide one option for importers. Japan's largest gas utility, Tokyo Gas, has procured one carbon neutral cargo from Shell so far, and interest will continue to grow among buyers for carbon neutral LNG, but this will be just one part of the package of measures needed on the pathway towards net zero.
Thanks. So I think we should remember that even before this announcement, the 2050 target, the trend for Japan's LNG buyers was to seek shorter term, more flexible contracts. So these buyers have traditionally been the premium credit-worthy partners for new LNG. So if they become less able to sign these long-term contracts needed to finance new capacity, it's an important group of buyers that are potentially taken out of the market, really. So bringing online that new supply needed to meet global LNG growth, it will become a greater challenge, particularly if other markets follow the net zero aspirations of Japan, Korea, and mainland China, the 3 largest buyers today.